Daniel smiled as he walked around the streets of Babylon. Every turn brought a new memory and brought up old memories, and he always loved seeing the people going around the streets of Babylon. He even more enjoyed watching the kids as they were playing in the back streets. Different streets he'd go down would bring different memories to his mind. So he walked by the gardens, remembering his time in the lion's den, remembering the statue, remembering when they first actually got to Babylon. And then he'd stop and he'd sit down for a few minutes and he'd reminisce about the people that he knew and people that had changed his life as well. Many of those people, if not all those people, were gone by this time, and that brought tears to his eyes. He couldn't remember when the last time was that he actually had been with his three friends, because they had been gone for many years. But even with thinking about them, he got a big laugh and remembered Nebuchadnezzar as well, and how God had used the four of them to change the king's life. And then he sat and he knew he needed to get up and walk past the palace, and he stopped, and more memories flooded his mind of the night of the banquets and God's hand actually appearing out of nowhere and writing on the wall. He still couldn't imagine that happening because he wasn't there, but just he was amazed how God kept continually using him. Now Daniel kept walking around and decided, well, it's time to head home. This is a normal thing I do every day, but time to take a rest. As he was heading home, he remembered the different dreams and visions that God had given him over the years. And he stopped and he sat down by the river's edge and just started praying. Just started talking to God. That was his normal thing. That's what people knew that he would do. People knew that Daniel always talked with God. Yeah, he spent morning, noon, and night with his window open towards Jerusalem praying, but Daniel was always in prayer. Daniel, while he was sitting by the river's edge, was talking with God and saying, I know that you've used me all this time, but I'm getting old. Our people are already gone back home. A number of us stayed behind, but you've still been really good to us. And I thank you for that. But I'm not as young as I was before. What is an old guy like me supposed to do? Yeah, I'm still involved in the court of Cyrus, and he still asks me to do things, but seems that month by month and year by year, the things that I'm asked to do are less and less. And he scratched his head, going, well, there's always a reason for everything that God's doing. I'm sure that he has a reason for this. Daniel stands up and realizes he was about to slip down off the bank and into the river, and he starts chuckling, remembering the first time many, many, many years ago when he did that, and how his friends laughed because he was so wet, and he remembers how he thought, well, I could have some fun with this. So he asks his friends for help, and they extend their hands, and he pulls them into the river as well, and they all laugh. But Daniel's drugged back to reality, and more tears go down his cheeks, because he knows that those memories are memories that this side of eternity he would not be able to talk about with his friends ever again. As he was thinking about that, all of a sudden he sees a bright light on the other side of the river. And he stops and he rubs his eyes thinking that it's just the brightness of the sun, but as he rubs his eyes, he realizes that it's another angel coming towards him. He looks and he looks and he looks and he realizes it's not just any angel, but it's actually Gabriel himself. Daniel stops and he said, well, I better sit down for this one, because I don't know what's going to happen this time. Daniel sits down and Gabriel comes over and sits beside him, and they start talking. Gabriel shares with him what's going on and the fact that Jesus is on his way with the message, but there's certain things going on in Persia that, Daniel, you need to be praying about, because there's some rough times coming. I can't tell you what's going on yet, but you need to be praying about what's ahead. And then just as soon as Gabriel appeared, he disappeared as well. Daniel sat there shaking his head, going, the older I get, the more I'm not sure how much more I'm going to be able to take of this. And he scratches his head, thinking about the words that Gabriel had told him, going, this is just too much. Here I thought that all these dreams of statues and beasts and everything else was enough. Now there's spiritual battles for Persia and Greece and all this other craziness. Daniel got up from the bench and straightened himself up, going, oh, another pop, I must be getting old. Well, I guess oldness is really just in your mind anyway. And he chuckles and he starts down the road towards his home. He wasn't living in the same place he had before, because Cyrus told him, I want you to live in a better place. And he put him in one of the best places in Babylon. So as he was walking back home, Daniel kept thinking about what had been done and what God was doing, and he stopped and he scratched his head, going, okay, what did Gabriel really mean by Jesus was going to come to see me? He said, well, okay, this happened before. I guess we'll have to wait and see what is actually going to come. But as he continued the little bit of journey back to his house, that kept bothering him, because he didn't know how long it was going to be until he would actually get the message that he was supposed to have. Time went by. Several days, several weeks, up to 3 weeks went by. Jesus hadn't come. More time went by. He still hadn't come. Till one day, one early morning after prayer, Daniel once again was walking the streets of Babylon, and he was by the river. And he did his normal sitting down on the bench, reflecting and looking over the water and thinking about what was happening, when all of a sudden he saw a form in the distance and a light that was brighter than ever before. Daniel started to stand up, but the moment that he stood up, he crumpled down to the ground, as he had no strength within him. When he woke up, it was a little while later, and Jesus was standing over him, smiling. Grabbed him by the hand and pulled him up, and both of them sat down on the bench. Jesus looked at him, and Daniel said, but Lord, I've been waiting so long for you to come with the message that you have. Jesus smiled and said, you need to remember that your time is not my time. I'm here at the right time, but I couldn't come sooner because of what was going on in other countries. Daniel said, Gabriel told me that, but I didn't know what to think about it. Jesus smiled and said, Daniel, it's not for you to worry about. I do have a message for you, and I do have something that you need to know and you need to share with others. but I don't want you to worry about what I'm about to say. And for the next several hours, Jesus unfolded what was going to happen after successive kingdoms and what was going to happen to the very end of time. And Daniel heard this, and all of a sudden, the next thing he knows, it's dark. And Jesus is again pulling him up on his feet and back onto the bench. Jesus looked at him and said, let's walk towards your house. So they get up and they start walking, and Jesus stops Daniel and puts a hand on his shoulder and says, Daniel, I've given all of this for a reason, but I don't want you to worry about this. What I want you to do is I want you to go home. I want you to write this. I want you to put all these writings together. And then what I want you to do is I want you to seal this until the right time. Because this is not for you. It's not for this time. But I'll show the people when it's time for understanding what this message is all about. Daniel didn't even know what to think, but Jesus grabbed him by the shoulder again and said, Daniel, I want you to remember this. It's time for you to slow down. It's time for you to rest. Soon, you'll be put to sleep. And the next thing you know is I'll be coming in eternity. Don't worry about what is going on, what the prophecies say. Just go your way, knowing that the next thing that you know, you'll fall asleep in me, and then you'll see me again. Daniel knew that might be the last time he saw Jesus, but he knew that when he fell asleep in him, that death isn't the final thing. The next thing he knew would be that he would see Jesus coming in the clouds to take him to heaven and to spend eternity back here on earth with him. He was so excited to be able to, thinking about that he looked around and Jesus was nowhere to be seen, and he jumps up and people laughed at him, hadn't seen Daniel jump and skip in years, and Daniel ran home and he wrote down what Jesus had told him, remembering the words that Jesus had said to him and the final prophecy, and even that very final prophecy that he was told that there would be something that would give people great joy when they came up to this time prophecy. He didn't understand that, but he knew that there would come a day that things would be explained. Not in his lifetime, but in eternity he would understand. And Daniel went his way. He fell asleep in Jesus, knowing that what was said and what was done would come to fulfillment. Now, right now, we're living in those times that Daniel was talking about. Jesus gave Daniel an amazing picture of what was to come. Now it's our choice. What are we going to do? Are we going to live lives like Daniel? Are we going to claim the promise that Jesus had given us, that even though we fall asleep, when we fall asleep in Him, we will be raised to everlasting life? Let's remember Daniel and his stories and continue to have that moment-by-moment relationship with Jesus as we wait for Him and as we continue to grow together as a family of faith.